Good morning and welcome to our session entitled Tome Improvement, Structuring and Outlining Your Book. I would now like to introduce our speaker, Dr. Bill Donahue. Bill is the best-selling author of Leading Life-Changing Small Groups. He also co-authored Coaching Life-Changing Leaders with Greg Bowman. Dr. Donahue was the co-developer of the DVD training resource Regroup. Bill also works as a coach in leadership development, organizational clarity, and transformational community. He has a bachelor's in psychology from Princeton University, a master's from Dallas Seminary, and a Ph.D. in adult learning and development from the University of North Texas. He also serves as an adjunct teacher at several graduate schools.
Today I want to use the metaphor of, the title's Tome Improvement. I hope you picked that up, but the metaphor for sort of building a house for how we structure and outline something that we're writing. And I start with this slide, creating spaces, because of what I believe about that. I really think that good writers really are artists in a sense, and we're both architect and artist. And today I'm talking to your inner architect, because we think of ourselves as people who have this art and this craft that we want to do, and but there is a requirement of structure and flow, and some of the things we're going to talk about today. They're not necessarily exciting things when you think about writing. We like to talk about our theme or our characters or what we're trying to do with our audience, but it often does rest on this structure / outline component, because I find that all the heart and all the passion and all the things I want to communicate have to be delivered in some sort of framework in most cases, and I want to help us do that today. So we're gonna talk about that, about creating the right kinds of spaces people move in and out of in our writing. Using the metaphor we're using, I want to talk about a blueprint for a moment. And we think of a home. Why does a home have a blueprint? Why is it essential that it has one? And it does these two things. It sets boundaries and identifies transitions, which are both very important to writing. And when I think of boundaries, I think in terms of sort of ground rules. What are the principles by which I'm going to operate here? What is going to guide my writing? Is it a set of values? Is it a set of ways that I want to communicate, language I want to use? But thinking through this ahead of time helps me structure my writing. What limits am I placing on my topic? You know, I can't say everything about it, obviously. So how far do I want to go? And having this sort of thinking ahead of time and structuring this project well helps me say, this is what I can talk about, this is what I shouldn't. This is something I need to spend more time in, this is not. As much as I hate to not be able to talk about it, I just can't. It allows me to let my yes be yes and my no be no in what I talk about. Helps me identify core themes, again, that I will focus on, and sort of the landscape of what I'm trying to do. How will it be laid out? Or you could use the term, like I put puzzle pieces on there because that's the way I think of it sometimes, particularly for those of you who would be more writing in fiction, perhaps, where you don't always know sort of how it's all going to come out. You've developed some themes, some characters, you're kind of just letting it evolve in the story. And it is kind of drawing in puzzle pieces, and there's a sense in which what each piece looks like, but you're not sure maybe what some of the connecting pieces will look like yet. And that's why structure is important even in that kind of writing. It helps you sort of lay out the puzzle and say, okay, at least I know what the boundaries are, and at least I know what some main pieces are going to be, and I'll build the rest around that as I go. It also identifies transitions, and I use a couple of different phrases here to kind of work our metaphor a bit. But it's that sense of, you know, what steps am I walking people down or up towards some content piece? What is the movement of this article or this story, this book I'm writing? What are the spaces I want to take people into, and what will happen when we go there? Are there turning points? Are there particular events, relationships, sort of moments along the way that we have these aha moments and we say, this is a turning point in the story, or now you're finally making your argument. You set me up sort of this way and I get that, but now you're paying it off and this chapter was crucial, you know, that kind of thing. And then just pacing. Will it be constant intensity? No, we hope not. We hope you move in and out of some of that, unless your audience and content dictate otherwise. But so having this is, I'm just trying to sell you on, I know this can be a little bit on the yeah, why do we have to have too much of this? Can't we just write? And that's kind of what happens when we sit down in front of our computer. If you still, if you write in a journal or whatever you do, structure is really important because it does help us set boundaries within which to work, and then helps us move in and out of these transitions that help our readers stay with us along the way. Here's a few key questions I believe we should ask around the whole idea of structure. And that is, when you lay this out in terms of what you're going to actually show the reader, how much do I want to give away? What I mean by that is my structure going to be so obvious on the front end that it really is an overview of where we're going? So if you're writing something that's a manual or it's a training tool, people want clarity. They want to know that. They want to know, why should I buy this? Will it help me get this kind of garden developed? Will it help me understand this issue or problem? How me get my taxes done? Whatever it is, I want to be able to tell pretty quickly by looking at the structure, even the table of contents. I'm going to flip through chapter headings. I want to know where this thing's going because I have a very specific goal. Or is it going to be more of this quick peek or arouse my interest, create angst? I mean, are you going to make me look at chapter headings and other components of this and go, I wonder what this is about? I wonder where the writer's taking me here. This is intriguing. This is mysterious. And you have to decide that based on what you're writing. How much is necessary for the reader? So there's a desire in us to do certain things, but we have to keep thinking about the reader and their, what's the context, the topic, audience, where's the audience? What do they need to know about the storyline to follow? Sometimes we want to tell more or less based on our own passion maybe, but we really have to put ourselves in the reader's perspective. And you can do this. You read a lot probably as those who are writers or emerging as writers. And you determine as you're reading a book whether or not the author is giving you enough or not. Sometimes I'm stuck in something. I'm 3 chapters in. I'm like, what is happening? Where is it going? I'm giving this thing 1 or 2 more chapters, and then I'm out. I'm frustrated. So I think you just have to sense that as you do it. And am I guiding or pushing them along? In other words, is this an invitation to look, to overcome some reluctance? Are we partnering on a journey? Am I sending you on a mission? Am I sort of behind you, sort of saying, now look what you're seeing? Or am I saying, I'm going to take you someplace? And I think these are all, I realize they're sort of philosophical, but I think they're questions for you to reflect on in the sense of what kind of tone are you creating as you look at the structure. And some of that you'll define along the way, but I think you do have to make some of these calls. Am I really pushing someone into an unknown area or an uncomfortable area by the way I'm writing and structuring it? Or am I more or less just standing alongside them as we walk together on a journey? Here's a few things. I'm going to use using our metaphor a little more, and I'll pop in and out of this, is exterior design and interior design. I think of structure as exterior design. So in the structure of it, first I want to be clear about these things. I won't spend time on it. I did the webinar last time or the time before on core elements, and if you need to go back and listen to that, I think you can do that or look at that. But so I'm not going to spend a lot of time there for those of you maybe who already listened to that. But you've got to be clear about these things up front, or you can't structure it. So assuming that we have some clarity about purpose and some of the core things. The main thing I like to do is do the classic storyboarding the structure. And when I do that, I'm noting an interplay between synthesis and analysis, which sounds, I guess, maybe too technical in some ways, but I'm thinking, what do I want to dive down deep on, sort of the analysis metaphor or way of thinking, and then how do the pieces fit together, more the synthesis. And I think those are two things that you have to keep in mind. So, for example, I'm laying out 3x5 cards on a desktop, or some of you may do it on your computer, or I sometimes use a flip chart. I have one in my office where I use a white flip chart and I just use stick-'em notes. And I'm laying out what I believe are the main moving points. We'll talk about those in a second. But then I'm going down sort of analytically, how deep do I want to go into any given area? What do I think needs to be done to do justice to this chapter or this section or this theme? And then pulling back again and saying, okay, in light of the overall, my 4 or 5 big movements, am I spending the appropriate amount of time on that? Or have I gone too deep? And is it balanced? A good example is the major segments of the Confession, Grisham's book. he has these three major segments: the crime, the punishment, and the exoneration. They have virtually three, or they all have about the same number of quote chapters. The chapters don't have headings. It's just chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3. But they are, there's about 15 chapters in each of those three sections. So it's a very sort of balanced book, if you will, where the author has chosen to spend about equal amounts of time in each of those three movements. So when he's in the crime, it's obviously about what's taken place and all the characters, and you're in 3 or 4 different geographical locations, and we move in and out of those. But it's all about the crime, the context of the crime. So he's decided, I want to spend the first third of the book about that and how it affects everyone and who did it or didn't do it and what are all the pieces as we start to move those puzzle pieces together. Then he moves to a whole different area, the punishment, and then finally to the exoneration. And so in his mind very quickly has these three major movements, even in a novel. So sometimes people think a novel is strictly this story that goes from chapter to chapter to chapter and it doesn't have these segments in it, but some writers will do that. Or it could be more structured in the sense of chapters with just very broad movements with defined turning points. So you have to think in terms of, let me lay out the general story. Where am I trying to take people? Or if I'm doing a nonfiction, what are the 4 or 5 truths or big content things I want to communicate on my topic? And then what are the broad movements in those, sort of what needs to be addressed in each? And are there any linking or turning points along the way? Sometimes it's just very compartmentalized. If you look at a book like, well, we'll come to an example later. I don't want to get ahead of myself. All right. Interior design is things like, how will the writing actually flow? And I'm using this, how do I move from room to room, sticking with our metaphor? Is it a staircase because I have a clear objective and I need to lay out steps? Do I actually have to outline this and say, okay, first we need to understand, how to shape your garden, how many square feet and how much room it's going to take. And next thing we're going to talk about is soil and, what needs to be in that, and nutrients, all that. Third step is going to be choosing your plants. The fourth step is going to be providing for shade and water and da-da-da. Fifth step is going to be ongoing, attention and pruning and care. And the sixth step, very obvious sort of, very logical order to it. It's kind of the staircase approach. The other way of thinking about it is a doorway, and a lot of writing happens this way, particularly as I observe in the fiction world, is people walk me into an environment. We've just left something bright and uplifting. Now we look into a dark part of a character's life or into an event. And so you've just taken me through a new passageway into a different kind of space. And so what I think you need a storyboard and lay out is the movements, even emotionally. We've talked about some of this before in other webinars, where you're going to, again, tell about these two wonderful characters. Now one of them has this dark past. Now we're going to walk into that room. How are you going to get me there? Is it going to be very abrupt? Is it going to be, boom, I'm in there and I'm seeing this tragic or terrible event? Or are you going to build suspense and drama as you walk me into that? So that's sort of the feel of it. Or is it the foyer approach? And I use this metaphor because I was reading an article that did this lately. And forgive me, I forget the title. But it kept coming back to a central theme, like we do in a home or maybe some buildings that you're in that have a central foyer kind of area, and all the rooms flow off of that. So you walk into a room, but then you come back to the centerpiece, and you walk into another experience and come back to the centerpiece. And it's often that you see some stories are around that where you do leave the core relationships of the character or the plot. You move into an area that may be background or history or the backstory, but then you come back to that centerpiece again. So your flow is really built off of that centerpiece, that main area of living, if you will, and you explore these other areas. And I know I'm kind of being still philosophical about this, but I want you to think in those terms of, where am I taking people? Is it a linear room to room to room to room kind of thing? Or is it more, we're going to explore different areas of the story, but it's all linked by a defining theme that I want to keep coming back to. It's all linked by a core principle that I want to keep raising, so we're going to keep coming back to that and writing about that and unpacking that more. And then think in terms of actual experiences as you move people in and out of the different aspects of the writing or the story. Do I want to create suspense or relief or empathy? What I want to people experience when I get there. And I'll give you an example from something that I put together recently. It's not published yet. I'm not necessarily promoting it to you. It's kind of a targeted tool for training leaders. But right at the front, and this was something the publisher gave me feedback on, right in the front of the book is something about the reality of the difficulty of change. I had it in chapter 9 of a 10-page book. So to me, I was laying out all the things that you do to build a certain kind of organization and support network. And then in chapter 9, I was coming to the place where I was saying, this is going to be hard work. So here's some things about change that you need to know. Well, the publisher said, you know what, I think you need to tell me that up front. I think you need to prepare me. I think you need to create a sense of this is going to be difficult, but you can do it. I need you to create that tension on the front end. Otherwise, it feels like a bait and switch because you have nice logical steps toward this and how you're building it, and then you hit me with oh, this might be really hard. You may fail. So it's like, don't do that to me. Tell me up front. It's okay if you scare me a little, sober me up a bit. Let me know that you're going to walk me through, give me hope. You're going to give me steps and process and skills and all these things. But also give me a reality check that this isn't just some light infrastructure transition we're moving toward, that this is going to be painful at times, it's going to be hard, and name that reality, but give me hope that you have some solutions. So there was this idea of create a sense of, I'm going to call it suspense here as I've mentioned it, but a sense of a light sense of fear, if you will, acknowledging the reality that change is hard and that they're going to hit some bumps along the way, but also provide a little bit of relief. But you're going to help me with that, Bill. We're going to address that as we move forward. So that's the way I want you to maybe think about some of that. And then some tips on outlining. I also storyboard each chapter or movement within the major themes or the major movements. So that's what I think Christian would have done as he laid out his big 3 categories. He would have gone on into each of those and laid out, okay, what's this look like? And identify the outcome of each subsection. You know, what do I want each piece to speak to about this topic? And then here's something that's been a real help to me is as you do your writing, as you look at each section of your writing, ask yourself this question. What do I want them to know? What do I want them to feel? What do I want them to do? This has been very helpful for me, both in teaching when I'm in front of a group of people, but also in writing. Because some of you probably are in situations where you are writing nonfiction and you're instructing people or you're outlining something as far as steps in a process or whatever, you can be all about the head and all about the hands. It can be about here's what you need to know and here's what you need to do. But there's no inspiration in it, or you don't sprinkle enough through it to keep reminding people why they're doing this and how joyful it is to do this and what the payoff is to do it. Or you could get all on the heart side because you're dealing with a very emotional issue and you raise a lot of passion and energy, but you don't give enough in the sense of, so what do I do with this? Or what do I need to believe about this differently? Or how do I need to think differently about this topic or about myself so that I can enter into this? So it's a good little framework for me to think through even the subsections, not just the huge movements, but what do I want people to be knowing as a result of this chapter or this subsection? What do I want them to be feeling? Encouraged, challenged, relief, sadness, whatever. And then what are some steps, tips, ideas, or what? And it may be that you decide, you know, in that section, it's a heart section. It's not a head section. It's not a hand section. This is pure heart. That's fine. But then pull back and look. This is the synthesis again. Look at the whole thing that you're writing and say, okay, if I'm going to be heavy on the heart here, are there other areas I want to be light on the heart? So a nonfiction example is I found a good interplay of these things in a number of books, but I had read The Audacity of Hope by Obama, and regardless of where your political aspirations may lie, I read from all sides and both sides of the spectrum, if you will, or of the political environment. And he does a pretty good job, I think, of talking about content, but also the heart. He does a good job of laying out themes in his structure about things he knows people wanted to hear about. And this was, of course, during the campaign season. And he wanted to tell people what he thought about politics and faith and government and world affairs and, you know, just things related to his background, what values he had. And so it's not a biography in the sense of A to Z story, chronological. It's around issues. The structure is built around key themes and issues, but within it is parts of his life story. So you get your heart pulled into some of how he grew up and what affects him and how he thinks, but you also get the tactical side of what he believes and what he wants you to know. You know, and I think I already kind of hinted at the fiction example. There's a number. My daughter, when she was younger, would read the Boxcar Children. It was a bunch of these books. They're all, I don't know, like, 100 pages long, small paperbacks. But there's movement in them, and it's clear that there's things they want you to know. The author pauses, even writing for a 10-year-old, 12-year-old, pauses to explain what is going on in this one book is about being, they're putting on a play in a theater, how the theater works and what the different roles are. And so there's instruction dropped in along the way in the story. It's very intentional. So it's not just how the characters feel, these young children, but it's actually teaching along the way. And I think that creates a dynamic that's very exciting for a reader to move in and out of. So synthesis to me is the pulling together of ideas and themes. Analysis is the taking apart. So let me give more an example. Let's say you're writing a book on, let's use our gardening example because I used it earlier. So now I'm in this section 3, chapter 3, whatever, and it's choosing the plants, that you're going to use for your garden or the vegetables, whatever the theme is. And so now I'm in a very specific sort of, I'm in analysis mode. Like, how much do I want to tell them? How specific? Which plants do I want to talk about? What framework am I going to give them on how to choose this? Do I take, how do you go to a store? How to save money when you buy them in groups of 20 at a time? I mean, how specific do I want to get? That's analysis. That's getting very detailed. It's looking very specifically at all the little sub movements within that section of walking someone into your content. Synthesis pulls back and then it says, okay, how does this whole section of choosing plants and shaping the garden fit with what I'm trying to communicate in my whole book? Because I'm talking about like nutrients and water and fertilizer in a chapter, and I'm talking about the landscape feel, maybe the look of them and all that. I'm looking at another section which is ongoing care and support or blah, blah, blah. The point, so that's more synthesis. So I want to say, wow, look at what I just did. I just spent 25 pages on choosing plants. I spent 5 on landscape. Is that the balance I want? Or do I want something that's more balanced? Have I spent too much time in some areas, not enough? So the synthesis is simply pulling back, looking at the big picture of how all the puzzle pieces fit. Analysis is taking one puzzle piece and cutting it very accurately and saying, this is what I want for this piece and where it goes in my story or in my chapter or whatever. I personally like knowing, like I think I used the Grisham example of the 3 major movements. He knew he was going to talk about the crime, the punishment, and the exoneration. And I think then wherever your heart is in the moment or whatever you want to write about, you can dive into one of those. You don't have to do all that linearly. But having some framework allows you not only to look at how you might structure those chapters, but how you might, as you're doing your work, how you might find little things that address your story. For example, if my head is in, using his example, the crime, then just as he does his life every day, he's going to be attentive to stories, insights, stuff he's watching on TV that prompt his thinking about how to talk about that. So to me, it allows me to live in certain areas of my writing as I read the newspaper, as I look at articles, as I look for illustrations. So that's why I like having that. I don't think it has to dictate, how many chapters and all that. But I like the broader, sort of, I know I'm going to have a living room, a dining room, a kitchen, but I don't know if it's going to be a really tiny kitchen yet or a big kitchen or whatever. That's okay. I'll get there when I get there. But I do know I want those 3 things there because we're designing a home. Now, if I was designing an art museum, that would be a whole different approach. So again, it goes back to, what do I need here? So I wouldn't get too specific too quickly in the story writing component. I like major themes, character development, plot, those kinds of things, and play out those a little bit. And then you'll start to see, I think I've addressed this enough. Let's move on to a different section. I know what I want to write about. Here's the topic. And then within that saying, what specifically about that topic? And you can storyboard that. Just take some pieces. You can do a brain dump first. So I want to be clear about the difference between a pure storyboard and sort of a brainstorming session. You may even invite others into the brainstorming session. The brainstorming session just says, hey, I know I want to write, and I'm going to stick with our metaphor if that's okay, or my illustration. I want to write about gardening. Well, that's good. Well, there's a bazillion books out there on gardening. What do you want to write about? So say, well, I don't know yet, but I just know I like it, and so I'm just going to brainstorm. So I start putting things on a board: flowers, plants, soil, showing my garden, entering a garden fair, whatever. 100 ideas could come out on that. I'm not talking about that level. That may be appropriate to do if you really just know you have a very broad theme and you just want to dump anything related to that you can think of or that others can think of onto a board. And then what you look for there is clusters of ideas and themes. Oh, look, these 3 or 4 words I put on this board, these 5 or 6 cards or stickums seem to relate to a higher theme that brings them all together. It's about structure of the garden, or it's about, again, choosing plants or whatever. So there you'll see natural things kind of pulling together. That's more from a brainstorm. But when you have a little bit more of a structure, storyboarding says, okay, I'll go back to Grisham's, okay, the crime, the punishment, the exoneration. Okay, let's think about the crime. What do I want to talk about with the crime? I want to talk about how it happened. I want to talk about who did it. I want to talk about the circumstances, the location. I would start writing these things down. They're not specifics yet. They're simply the categories I know my reader's going to want to know. Where did it take place? Who did it? What did it involve? What led up to it? What was the motive behind it? And then as I look at that, then I can start to determine how much of that I do want to give away. Maybe I just want to hint at some things that I'm going to pay off later in my writing. But at least I know what the themes are there, that I would leave the reader too much in the dark if I didn't cover them. So storyboarding helps me think through what are things that just have to be talked about to give the reader clarity. And the rest would be just things I want to talk about there. Then if any one of those really piques your interest, you can pull that one card off, like the actual committing of the crime, and say, I'm just going to live in this one for a week. I want to think about what was going on in the character's mind, what was in their background, what was their motive, what kind of feelings were they feeling when they did it. And then you want to get in the one who had the crime against them, the victim. What was going through the victim's mind? I'm going to storyboard that just in its own little place, just fear or terror or whatever. And how would I talk about that? You can really, that's where you see you're getting analytical. You're diving down very deep into that. Then you can cluster all those stickums or everything together, stick them back on your board, which can be a whiteboard, a wall. I just use walls, frankly, sometimes. And just put them all there. You can staple them together or whatever. But say there's a theme of writing around that particular topic or subtopic that I've just explored. Now I'm going to go back to the big level again, synthesis, and look at the big movements and see what I need to talk about next. So I tend to work across the top and then down. I tend to lay out my bigger flow and then some of the subpoints under it, and then pick one that I feel passionate about or I have a lot of information on, and then just start really diving down into that one.
Wonderful. Well, if there's no more questions, I think that wraps up our session for today. I'd certainly like to thank our presenter, Dr. Bill Donahue, for sharing his time and expertise. I hope you all found the session to be valuable and informative, and we look forward to having you join us on other webinars when your schedule permits. Please note that there is a ton of other content on the Author Learning Center website, including other webinars, videos, podcasts, and articles, all designed to help you write, publish, and market your